Avery, like we said before, for Fridays are a big deal now in college football. Louisville, a team that gave up 20 unanswered points in the first half, and they responded by winning this game on a comeback by answering themselves up by 20 points. They ended up winning this game 31-27. Amazing comeback by Louisville, and it was just unbelievable. On a Friday night against Boston College. Boston College, the first 2, 3 weeks, they start off decent the regular season, but this game, it is a tough one for them to swallow.
It is, and I think Louisville, I think they were still kind of from the Miami hangover. Their game with Miami was, a back and forth. I'm like, they scored a combined total of 100 points. So I think Louisville wanted to make a statement with Boston College, excuse me, and they they started off okay, and then they just kind of lost control. But you're right, on Friday night, when you get the chance to play, and like I said again, you're playing in your conference. Louisville had a chance to make a statement. Even though it wasn't a pretty win, they got the win. And now what they can do is for their next 3 or 4 games, they need to figure out how to make that statement and probably use a little bit of help in the ACC to see what they can do, kind of after that Miami loss. But a good showing by Louisville. And you're right, Boston College started off really strong at the beginning of the year. They were kind of one of those teams that could play spoiler for other ACC teams. But this is going to be interesting with a lot more of these really interesting ACC matchups for the next 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, but this other matchup, it's pretty interesting, Avery. SMU, Mustangs versus Duke Blue Devils. Look, yes, SMU won 28-27 in overtime. But if you're Duke, you gave that game away. They didn't capitalize all the turnovers that SMU committed. They didn't turn those turnovers into points. I respect Duke for coming back and rally, but we could have had a different conversation had they taken advantage of those turnovers. And I respect Manny Diaz for wanting to go for the win. A lot of coaches they coach scared, but he didn't. Even though it was an incomplete pass by Malik Murphy for the 2 point conversion. But if you're SMU, yes, you got the victory, but you can't be too happy with the way you played.
I agree with you. If you're SMU, you're looking at this, especially, and I've said this before, you're a ranked team. When you're playing unranked teams, especially on the road, you are expected to win decisively. And I do agree with you a little bit. Duke did not capitalize on any of the turnovers because in college football, that's almost like the biggest thing you can do. You get the turnover, you score, you rattle the opposing team's offense, and you turn the momentum to your side. And Duke did not do that. And Duke, if they won, this would have been they would have been in prime position because next week they're playing the University of Miami. And instead of being like 7-1, now they're 6-2. Now, if I'm Duke, go back to the drawing board. A failed 2 point conversion, but I agree with you. I think Manny Diaz wanting to go for a win would have been great. Why keep going for the tie when you can just seal the deal? But if I'm SMU, I would really be worried about the game you played at Duke because and Duke is kind of one of those teams in football. They're kind of looked at for the past few years. Oh, Duke's on the schedule, so it's no big deal. We've said this before. You have these college teams that play other schools and they don't give them the respect when they either play on the road or when they come to their house. So you you know Duke being underrated even before playing SMU, I think they had a good shot to beat the Mustangs. So the fact that Duke kind of gave that game away, it rattles me a bit because I think they could have won that game, and I think they could have won that game decisively to put them in an interesting position next week playing the University of Miami. So SMU definitely needs to go back to the playbook, see what they did wrong, see what they need to improve on. Duke, on the other hand, needs to say, okay, what didn't work with SMU? What mistakes do we not need to make? Because they're going down to Hard Rock Stadium Saturday to play a top 5 University of Miami team. They are not going to give them any breaks. And if Duke wants to show that they are a player in college football now, they need to play a hard, decisive game in which they convert turnovers, which they convert, field goals, where special teams, they need to play a complete game all the way around on both sides of the ball.
Yep, 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 indeed. And how about this, Avery? Kansas versus Kansas State. If you're a Kansas Jayhawk fan, you were probably punching the TV and thinking, when can we ever beat this team? Like, why is this team keeps, getting in our way? They came very close of escaping on the road with that victory. But then those 2 field goals in the fourth quarter, and the fact that Kansas Jayhawks didn't score in the fourth quarter, they shot themselves in the foot by not scoring in the fourth quarter.
You're right. The Kansas State game is kind of one of those interesting rivalry games that slips under the radar. They call it the Sunflower Bowl, Kansas being the Sunflower State. It's interesting considering that I visited Kansas a couple years ago and seeing the school and seeing the campus and seeing how people just love both teams, no matter where you are in the state. That game is very interesting because you're talking about two teams that play really great football. And every single year, and another thing about this one, this game is usually like the last game of the season. Now, this was the last game in October. This is usually a game that that winds down the season, not, you still have some more football to play. So you're right. If you were a Jayhawks fan, you were like, what just happened? But both teams, I think they need to be applauded for playing just a really great game. And we've said this, when you watch college football, I love seeing the passion of the players on both sides of the ball. And you probably saw it no better than, Kansas and Kansas State. And of course, you have these other rivalry games that, that pop up every year. Penn State and Ohio State are going to play this weekend, but almost like these interstate school rivalries, also, make headlines too, especially with the game that was so close, so very, very, very close. And I've said it before, special teams, come on, get your kickers, come on, you need to support your kickers. When their numbers called, that's what they do. And it's unfortunate when those things can kind of turn the tide. But overall, I mean, Kansas State pulled it out. Kansas State pulled it out. But if you're a Jayhawks fan, I'm like, you need to be worried about these next few weeks.
Oh yes, oh yes. But great game between Kansas and Kansas State. That was one of my favorite games of this weekend. And how about this? Texas A&M, they made a huge leap in the AP poll top 25. They're number 10 right now. BYU is sitting at number 9. Ohio State, as you can see, wearing the hoodie, they're
Yeah,
number 4. But Miami Hurricanes, it was all about the U. I'm number 5.
they're absolutely.
It is getting interesting. It's getting more tighter. And like I said, this is probably, or I should say, arguably my favorite college football season so far, just because of the changes that's being made. We have now 12 teams, qualify for the playoffs. So, and that's what I want. I want more competition, and we're certainly getting that. But major Texas A&M are one of the biggest winners of this weekend. Huge
I
win over
agree.
LSU.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. And if I remember when we did our preview, I said Texas A&M wins this, it's going to be a big jump for them, and it paid off in dividends. But you're right, the big deal, and we kind of said this, last year when the 12th playoff team comes into effect, you're going to see some shakeups, and you're going to see some teams where, depending on how they do it, how certain teams get in and how certain teams are going to be on the outside looking in. And knowing that the format has already been, revealed and discussed. It's the article ESPN did is okay. I still keep rereading it, but the main thing that I take away from this playoff is definitely going to be if you win your conference championship. It is possible, and this can even go from our preview that we did a couple days ago. Even though Navy lost, and they lost badly, it is possible that Navy and Army could play their conference game, win, either one of those teams win, play their end season game, and whoever wins with the conference championship could still get into that playoff. Winning your conference now, and with the 9 conferences involved, winning your conference now is a big deal now, is an absolute big deal. So BYU, being in prime position, looks really good. University of Miami being in prime position looks really good. I will say the one team that's probably gonna be the one that might have some, we don't have, how come, we don't have enough teams in, it's probably going to be the Big 12. Big 12 is probably the most competitive conference, and probably that's going to be the one where there's going to be so much movement, even when it comes to their conference title, where if they have 3 teams in the playoff, that'll probably be the most, because according to the playoff, it does not matter how many schools of a particular conference can be in this playoff. But I do see that Notre Dame is now writing their own story. Notre Dame does not have a conference. And after this season, if because they do not have a conference, I think the president of the school or the athletic director or whoever, is in charge of that needs to make some phone calls, because that could be the one thing that keeps Notre Dame out of the playoff. And they may need to rethink that. So it's possible in this new playoff scheme, you could have an abundance of SEC teams. You could have an abundance of ACC teams, and Big 10 and Big 12 schools are just kind of, are into what's left over. But the next 4 weeks coming up in November are going to be very, very interesting. And like we said it before, not only do you need to win, you need to win decisively. You cannot win by a point or two or a field goal. If you are ranked, if you are leading your conference, you need to go into wherever you're playing, if you're playing at home, and you need to blow these teams out of the water. A team win of at least 12 to 15 points will keep your school from not falling in the ranking, because it's not just the AP poll that you have to look at, it's also that college ranking poll, because that college ranking poll can be a 2 to 4 uh, um, ranking that can have you, looking at a first round bye, or you're playing in the first round. And like I said, you could have teams on the outside looking in, but like I said, I think the one school that is in prime position to write their own story is Notre Dame. Now, their one loss at Northern Illinois still may be an issue, but like I said, Notre Dame is the one school that can write their own destiny. And for the next 4 weeks, we're going to see how this is going to play out, especially for a lot of schools. And it's not just the games on Saturday. It's going to be those games on Friday too. And we're going to see some schools that are going to make some statements. And just like last week, when Pitt wanted to make that statement against Syracuse, there's another school. Look for them to be on a tear. You're going to have some schools that are just going to play spoiler for the sake of spoiling somebody's good time. And as kind of negative it is to say, it's going to be interesting to watch, because that's when college football gets really, really exciting.